This week on the Kungpaokenny Podcast, I talked to Ricky Rkryptic Peterson, the founder of Cal Poly Esports and a figurehead in the Collegiate Dota 2 scene. Ricky has been casting Collegiate Star League for years and is now doing freelance work for one of Dota 2's largest casting studios Beyond the Summit. In this podcast, we go over Collegiate Esports' lack of popularity, how it can be a great foundation for a career in esports, and a clash between amateur and collegiate scenes in the future. I hope you enjoy.
Hello, everybody. Welcome to another episode of the Kungpaokenny Podcast. Today, we are discussing something very different, but also very near dear to me. We're going to be talking about the collegiate esports scene. Today with me, I have a special guest. I have Rkryptic, or as I'm going to call it, Ricky. I'm going to let him introduce himself. And
going on 3 years now. I was a community manager for them and am working on trying to create my own collegiate in-house leagues, because we've got a lot of players that don't manage to make it onto a team. So yeah, it's something near and dear to my heart as well.
Interesting.
I love it.
That's cool. So part of why I got started, why I want to highlight collegiate esports some part, is because that's like really where I transitioned my, esports from like a hobby and a pipe dream that I never thought could be anything real. And working in collegiate esports really gave me that fire to be like, wow, this is something that's possible, right? And I hope that like by doing this podcast and really going into it, we have, the small amount of viewers that watch the show are able to have some sort of insight or some sort of inspiration to go and join collegiate esports, because I think it's still a great portal for you to start your esports career. So anyway,
awesome.
Let's start with like the first question. I think that like the collegiate scene is really interesting because when we think about it, we see a lot of other collegiate scenes, especially in the US, like football or basketball. Collegiate football and basketball are such huge things. They're their own, they're their own thing. March Madness is a huge point of, not only money and income for a lot of people, but also a lot of point of popularity during when it's on. Why do you think collegiate esports hasn't popped off the same way that traditional sports has?
So this one I had a long time trying to think about, and I would say a lot of it does come back to money. Part of it is also kind of like how media portrays gamers at a whole. I think there's unfortunately still somewhat of a negative connotation to being a gamer in society, particularly in the US, not necessarily in other countries. I know it's a lot more the norm outside of North America, specifically the US, but the money is also the second issue, whereas they are in a scenario where I think a lot of universities and even, professional scenes don't know how to monetize esports correctly. They're still in this weird scenario where they're trying to treat it the same as conventional sports, and they look at it, they apply this business model that's worked so well for them over the last 50 years or so, and it's created tons of money, and they're like, yeah, we can just put this right on esports, it'll be fine, and then it doesn't work.
do you have examples of specific situations that you could give us of like where money might have been the biggest factor?
The biggest thing is live events, is where you generate all of your money not all of your money, you generate a lot of money from live events with your standard football, basketball, events type style. That's where a lot of money comes from, and then it's from, sales of merchandising and stuff like that. When it comes to esports, all of your money is coming from sponsors and merchandising. That is it. You don't make money on live events. Live events are incredibly costly, typically low turnout, and so you have this like situation where these companies have come in, they've invested money, they're like, we're going to put a huge event on, it's going to be great, and then they lose tens of thousands of dollars. And they're like, well, this sucks. I'm out.
I agree. And I think collegiate is really interesting because a lot of it, like that I've noticed, is definitely like driven by passion, because what you have to realize is I think a lot of people in the collegiate scene are, again, students, and they're putting like half their time into this. And there's like, from my experience, there's obviously people can't put as much time into it. Again, they're not getting paid. They hope to get paid one day for esports work that they do, right? One day. But, you don't at that point. And you're hosting a lot of these events, and you see a lot of these really well hosted tournaments just from volunteer work by a lot of people, and sometimes really, really amazing things can happen. But at the same time, it's also just like such a big barrier, right? Because you know, kids don't get paid, kids don't know if the future is stable in this, and the level of the level of commitment from different people is different. Some people just join their university esports club because they want to have fun. Other people want to join and win tournaments only. Other people want to host great events. And there's just this large pool of people that do different things, right? Esports is a very large scene.
Yeah, there's the countless stories of someone being like, hey, I applied for another esports job and it was unpaid. Yeah. You're like, yes.
It's either unpaid or it's part-time right now, maybe full-time later.
Yeah.
And then
it's like you said, a lot of what you see in the industry. I'm most familiar with Dota 2 just because it's the game that I have been involved with my whole life. But all of the tournament scenes that pop up that in North America specifically that aren't run by BTS are all ran by the community, funded by the community. Like there's no sponsors for a lot of these. It is all done by people with a passion, like you said, and that's about it.
But that's also something that makes the scene really beautiful. I think it really brings a lot of people together. And when you do find that group of people or like that set of people, and usually you'll find them within these esports clubs, that you see that these people have the same passion that you do, the same drive to host events or to do tournaments, and to do it out of just like the passion that you have and not for any monetary value. It really drives you to do better. And I think it's like that's one of the things that I really like. That's one of the reasons why I want to talk about Collegiate so much, because you know, being in my collegiate esports club really pushed me to do a lot of things. Anyway, if you as we've seen, there's like a lot of issues that we can talk about with collegiate esports. You know, one of it is like this lost in translation aspect, where a lot of people think that they can just put money into something and then they'll
get a return.
Yeah, they'll get a return, right? And that's not. It's a very difficult challenge, especially with Dota. Dota is really hard to get people out. Trust me. I've tried to host my own tournaments. It's really difficult to get a LAN out. So talking about all of these disadvantages, what do you think are some of, like, if I gave you unlimited resources, unlimited time, and unlimited money in order for you to create your dream collegiate system, right?
Oh my gosh.
And like, keep in mind, system's not just a competitive circuit. Like, bring me into like how you would maybe work scholarships, if you have like an idea of that, or like what it would look like. What would it look like, Ricky?
So this one, this is such an incredible question, because no one knows like the correct way to go about it, because it's still so young and everyone has like their different ideas on could this work, but we don't know because it's never been done. I think I'm gonna jump ship here for a moment and say that one thing I have really liked when it comes to collegiate is the involvement from companies like Blizzard and Riot. As much as I'm not a huge fan of the companies personally, like fair. I don't play many of their games anymore. I don't really do that, but I will say they have done a fantastic job at trying to promote a collegiate ecosystem for their games that made it more accessible. And that's the one thing that, as a Dota player has been frustrating. And I think when it comes to creating like the perfect collegiate ecosystem, is it will require this combination of publisher and universities. Like they do need to work together to build an environment that not only fosters the game, but fosters an actual competitive scene. And when you have a lot of, universities that are like kind of dipping their toes in creating, their first scholarship program, there's a handful out there nowadays. We're seeing more and more pop up, but you really do need a kind of like I don't want to say the NCAA, because there are a lot of issues with like the collegiate governing governing bodies, but there does need to be essentially like a ruling body or a governing body that helps kind of create rules and regulations for all of the universities to follow, help funding a program that each university can have, because right now there is no funding for this. All of the funding comes out for other programs. Esports is kind of just left out to dry. And I think, putting a lot of the universities on an even playing field, allowing them to sponsor and recruit players under scholarships, and then having the publishers involved as far as making tournaments, that go through the whole collegiate season or go through the whole collegiate year. I think that would be a fantastic way to do it, rather than relying on individual companies to create, or individual tournament organizers to create competition. Because right now you have companies that have shown up, put on a good tournament, and then dispersed because there just wasn't enough return in it, or because it was too difficult to do. There's companies like Collegiate Star League, which is one of the only ones that has been consistently running tournaments for the last 11 years now.
Yeah.
But they're really the main one. And outside of that, you have universities hosting their own kind of inter-university leagues with nearby universities and stuff. But yeah, I think it would be really cool to see a somewhat of a mandated team for each university, and then having publishers help fund the programs and the tournaments that these players would play in, rather than independent companies. I think that would be like a great merger between the two, and not only would foster like a better competitive environment in collegiate, but as the transition out of collegiate into amateur and professional, you have more players, you have more talent, you have everything that in between. So I think that would be a dream come true, but I don't see that happening anytime, unfortunately.
I mean, realistically, like, what do you think that, like, in the next, I mean, what do you think that the collegiate landscape looks like in the next, like, 10, 15 years? Like, do you think, I mean, for me personally, I think that, like, League might have a lot more support for it. I think Riot has always put money into ULOL. Blizzard is, up in the air. We don't even know what games really they want. Like, Hearthstone is still running, obviously.
Yeah.
And, but, like, what do you think the landscape will look like in 10 years? Do you think there'll be some sort of semblance of League ready or not? Or do you think we're still going to be in the same place?
I think there has to be an improvement. Not because not because we want it, but because the future generations are going to demand it. We're at a point now where so many more people are getting into competitive gaming. They want to see it at a collegiate level. It is by becoming a popular demand at a lot of universities. And, when students pay tuition at these universities, and a lot of them are asking for an esports program, a university will eventually listen, because there's money to be made from these students. They will be paying a tuition, or they will grant them a scholarship, and then they will have a established esports program that other students will participate in. So it becomes like this rolling ball. But yeah, down the line, 10 years from now, I would say it would be the norm that a university will have an established university sponsored esports program. It's not going to be a what I did, which is like a run around talking to professors and IT staff to try and create my own esports org at my university, and find rooms that we can actually host LANs in. And it was basically just a group of clubs rather than anything.
I feel you.
Yeah.
Just like Scrappy running around, getting rooms together, booking venues, and
it's like we will see LAN centers, or I mean, the quote unquote LAN arena is what a lot of people like to reference them as, or the esports arenas. They're not going to be super fancy probably, but they'll probably just turn a couple conference rooms in a building into an esports room.
Yeah.
And it's that simple. Except computers,
I think that's like a lot. That's like what a lot of lads go through. That's all they do.
It's great.
Yeah,
I think that would be the norm. I think 10 years from now, that should be what we could expect.
So I think that, like, personally, we've already seen kind of movements forward into this area from a lot of schools. So if you see like UC Irvine, or a lot of UCs actually, they really pushed forward with their esports programs. UC have done very well in League over the past few years, and they're finally receiving support from the school. They have their own gaming lounges now, where you have these like rooms where it's just like 40 practice stations for a bunch of people, and students just come through and play anyway. UBC Esports have been able to do this all on their own too, completely student funded and funded by sponsors. We have now a gaming room with like 25 computers in it, where our collegiate teams can practice and people can play. And I think that's a really cool transition. Speaking of that, I think that collegiate esports provides you a lot of opportunities, as you were saying. Although there's like a lot of issues, I think collegiate esports for the next 10, 15 years, as you'll say, is I think going to be a very large scene, right? It's going to be it's going to grow a lot within the next 10, 20 years. And I think a lot of people can get into it now, would be able to develop a lot of skills that you would need. So like to be working in esports in the future, what do you think are like, give me like 3 main positive factors that you think a person can get joining the local university esports association or club, or even participating in tournaments and whatnot?
Yeah. I mean, I can just pull off of personal experience. Like,
For sure.
some of the things that I learned, I would say number one for me was a way to network with people like with similar interests or in the industry potentially. Like when you work in or participate in collegiate esports, for instance, our club, we would bring in speakers and representatives from different companies and people that would provide insight on how to get into the industry. And it's invaluable knowledge. You don't pay anything to listen to this person talk, potentially get the chance to ask them questions and network, get their business cards. Like networking is everything in esports. I honestly cannot stress this enough. People talk about how esports, it's still so young. Mm-hmm. It is entirely who you know and who you can work with over the years to help get you into the scene. It is so small still. You said it's going to grow a ton. It is an infant.
It is an infant. I think there's so much potential for this scene to grow. And I think that personally, I would agree with you. Networking is one of the most important aspects that I think you would get from joining your local university association, mainly because I think a lot of the times when you're an esports fan, before you get into university and before you might have an inkling of, I maybe could do this in the future, but I have no idea what pathway there is to get me in there. Yep. Collegiate is the best way to dip your toe, right?
Yeah.
At whatever level, it's the best way to dip your toe, because for a lot of people, it continues to foster this passion, even though it's not that big yet. And for a lot of people that were already very passionate, you start doing a lot of stuff that's involved with esports. You start understanding what networking is. You start cold emailing, you start understanding how to build a proposal for a tournament. You understand what you need, the behind the scenes of what a tournament needs, or like what a social gathering needs, what it takes to recruit players onto a team. But I think all of these things are such invaluable pieces of actual experience that you will get, that you will actually use in the field when you potentially become an esports person in the future. One of the things to build off that is when if like you said, you kind of dip your toes, you get involved, and if it's something that you decide, I want to work here, this is what I want to do. Like you said, Collegiate is the best way to do it. Get involved with the program, try and apply for open positions, and move your way up and gain that new experience every step of the way. Like you will learn a lot. Just like you said, about all these various things in your years at the university on top of what you're already learning. And then you'll probably build contacts in the industry while you're doing it. I mean, that's the best way to do it, hands down. I think, to be honest, for me, I wouldn't have dreamed of starting this podcast if I wasn't I only really started this podcast because I had a really figured out that I really enjoyed esports journalism, or journalism in general, once I graduated, and a part of it was also that I had accrued a lot of I'd met a lot of people in just the year, 2 years that I was in the UBC Esports Association and hosting these events. And I felt like I had so many people who had so many great stories to tell, or so many experiences they could share to a lot of people. And, when I first came into university, I had no thoughts of this. And I wish that I got started earlier. I wish that the moment I got in, I was able to have this opportunity. So I feel like getting it out is a really interesting, is really good for other people. What are other main positives?
Some of the other positives, one of the other things that I really enjoyed was kind of just a feeling of camaraderie or kinship. You don't, when you're at a university, there's so many clubs that you can join for special interests, and for me, those were anything from wakeboarding and riding dirt bikes and then gaming. Those are my 3 clubs. That's literally all I did. But I spent so much time trying to find gamers to play stuff with when I was at my community college, because they just didn't exist. And so I went to the university down the road, and I was like, please, someone. And I met, what was the Cal Poly Dota 2 club at the time. And, I became like a lifelong friends with a lot of these guys. And, I remember our very first LAN of, we tried to put together a tournament. The LAN switches were broken, so we had to host a 1v1 tournament instead. And it was just like all sorts of disasters. But like those are the things you remember. And everyone who was at that tournament remembers every single thing that happened at that tournament. And it's like you don't build those bonds outside of, you don't build those bonds just online, like just playing games with people online, like going in, meeting your other, gamers with whatever games you play, and then meeting people outside of your game. Like that's one of the things that esports orgs do, is they bring people from all sorts of communities, like meeting the League of Legends, the Rocket League, Hearthstone, Overwatch players. Like I'm friends with a lot of these people, and I never would have met them in my entire life, because we all stay at home and we just play games.
Yes,
like that's just how we are. I spend 16 hours a day on a computer almost. Like it's just how it goes.
But like surprisingly, spending 16 hours in front of a computer when there's a person next to you also doing the same thing is much better than it is doing it alone.
It's way more fun. Yeah, it's a completely different thing. And so for me, I said networking is everything. To me, what I got out of it more was just a bunch of lifelong friends that I'm gonna have forever, and I wouldn't trade that for anything.
As a tangent, do you think you could tell how, like, what was your personal journey into like collegiate esports, just like as a tangent, like how you started, and you give us how you started, but what was the work that you did over years, like a short
So for me, I've always been somewhat into competitive gaming. I competed a lot in the original Gears of War. I competed in tournaments like constantly. We were what was I don't even remember the body that console gaming had back then. There was like game battles, and there was the other one.
MLG?
That I can't MLG, yeah, thank you. So we competed in MLG. We were like rank 5. Like we were really good.
Ooh.
Yeah, we were really good. But school, sports, and job made it like too hard to really pursue. And it's just like it was something I knew I was good at. Like competitive gaming to me was just way more fun, way more interesting than regular sports. Despite being a good athlete, I was just like, I'm gonna go home and play video games instead. Screw this. Like like that was just what I wanted to do. And so when I actually could have enough money to build my own PC, I went from playing like the original Warcraft at 10 FPS to being able to play a game like League of Legends or Heroes of New Earth. And that was what pretty much cemented me being like, this is going to be, what I'm going to try and compete in if possible. And then when they announced Dota 2, it was pretty much all it was over from there. I was like, all right, I'm in. Played, just a ton. Finally going through, I was in community college for 5 years, trying to apply to a university. Finally got in, but because I didn't get to start at this 4-year, I felt like, I was pretty far behind a lot of my classmates that I'd like to play with. So I had already reached out to the Dota 2 club at the university ahead of time. So I had already kind of known some of the people there. And then when I finally transitioned to the university, I just immediately tried out for their Dota 2 team. We put a roster together. It happened to be a very successful roster. Nice. We went all the way to LAN finals. Yeah, so like we were very good. It was one of those things where we didn't really know what to expect. I took it way more seriously than everyone else. Everyone else kind of chilled, but for me, it was like, this is something I wanted to do well in. I don't really, when I try to do something, I pretty much try to go all out at it. I would say in a competitive environment. So, yeah, it was kind of just like a slow transition of like, I knew I was always going to try and be in gaming. Like you could ask my parents, my cousins, my brothers, my sisters, literally everyone. I was just like, I was like a 10-year-old being like, gaming's gonna be the future.
No, I remember.
Screw soccer. This sucks. Like I was just, that was what I was saying when I was like 10, 15 years old. I was like, gaming, you guys are all,
you're all boomers. You have no idea what you're talking about.
Yeah, they don't know what they're talking about. And then 10 years later, they came in and be like, why haven't you ever tried streaming? And I'm like, Remember when I did and you guys shut the power off of the house?
Yeah.
So it's just like, it's just so funny because they're kind of coming around. And I think the older generation is starting to understand. But
I think if there's one language that translates to the boomer generation is that there's going to be a lot of money soon in esports.
Exactly.
Really
That's what I'm saying. It's money.
Yeah.
That they don't know how to monetize it. They've been struggling monetizing it, but once they figure that out, it's a no-brainer.
Yep.
But yeah, for me, it was just a natural progression almost. I ran into one of the Cal Poly Dota players like in a Dota pub, and he had like the CP logo in front of his, or he had like the CP Slow tag in his name, and I was like, "Yo, is that Cal Poly Slow?" And he was like, "Yeah." I was like, "Do you guys have a Dota club?" And he was like, "Yeah." And I was like, "Dude!" And so that's how I actually found them, like in a random pub in Dota 2. Then I reached out, joined the club for a couple years before I transferred over.
That's so sick.
Yeah, it was really funny.
You bring a lot of people together. Yeah, I think that's some really good insight. Hold on, I wanted to ask you a question. I just forgot, and I wrote it down on my phone. Okay, yeah, here. This question I feel like is really interesting. So I think for most people that view collegiate esports, right? I think to me at least, you discover that there are these two forces below the semi-professional / professional scene, which I think are the amateur scenes and the collegiate scenes. And I feel like within the next like 5 to 10 years, we're gonna have sort of a clash, right? Where people are like, overlap. Yeah, it's a huge overlap because all the good college players are probably also all the good amateur players, right? And depending on where they get the most money, whether or not they're enrolled in a university, whether or not the university provides a scholarship, because of a multitude of factors, some people might pick amateur over collegiate, or collegiate over amateur, or the other way around, right? So as an example, Dota 2, I think, doesn't have a huge burgeoning amateur scene. It's, especially in NA, is pretty bad. It's pretty garbage, right?
Yeah, we'll get to that in a moment.
Yeah, so and from what I've heard from my experience of being like the Dota 2 director for UBC Esports is that CSL gets mad competitive for Dota 2. Because for a lot of people, it's a spot where these collegiate players can go to university, a piece of parents go to university, but at the same time compete at a very high level. Like a lot of the CSL teams take shit very seriously. Like you would be surprised. Some of these people have team houses, which is insane.
I know. I played against the UBC like rating 3-time champions. Like that team was insane.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Like those people had like a lot of people when it comes to Dota 2, just like they push really hard, especially for collegiate. So how do you think this resolves itself in the future? Do you think that everything's going to be taken over by the collegiate scene? Is it going to be just the amateur scene? Like, what does it look like to you? And how would you reconcile this issue?
So this is what I've thought about a lot, because in the Dota 2 amateur scene, you have your tier 1 pros, your tier 2 kind of teams that can qualify to tournaments like regularly is what I would say, and then your tier 3, which are your stacks, your open qualifier teams thrown together last moment, or your collegiate teams. And that's literally what it is. It is a massive overlap, this tier 3 scene, of a lot of collegiate players or soon to be collegiate players for the people that are even younger. Because we have people that aren't even in college yet competing in these stacks or competing on huge teams. And yeah, when you're talking about CSL getting hyper competitive, you're right. It's because the only like level of competition that these people have is either open qualifiers, which is for 2 days, and then you're like, all right, well, I guess we're done, we're going to disband, or like you somehow make it onto a tier 1 or tier 2 team, which is incredibly rare because there's so few teams in NA in general. The sponsoring organizations are just not there. Everyone's kind of been fleeing the scene for year after year, and so CSL has kind of created this I guess platform for a hyper competitive like tournament in a game that really lacks it in the tier 2 or tier 3 scene. There is no competition in tier 2, tier 3. And so you have this year-long tournament that runs, and like you said, some of these teams put gaming houses together. A lot of these players become, best friends, so they just lived with each other anyway. But I mean, the top end stacks here are ridiculous. Like they are borderline like teams that could qualify for
sure
tournaments. Like, the teams are really good. It, like, shouldn't be underestimated. And it's unfortunate because we're slowly seeing teams fall apart or disband year after year, and like the number of teams signing up has just been going down year after year. And a lot of that is, I would say, Valve's fault. Unfortunately, a lot of that is just the fact that there's no sponsoring organizations left. Prize pools are diminishing. There was some issues, obviously, last year with the tournament because of COVID, causing a lot of problems with them being able to finish it out. But yeah, there is a huge overlap as far as fixing it and creating this scenario where it's like, well, is a player going to skip collegiate and just play, amateur or semi-pro? In other games, I can't imagine. I don't really. I'll come back to it in a second, but I think in other games, what we're going to be seeing is a kind of like a rule set coming out from the publisher of the game, essentially, where they're going to draw a hard line, kind of like what you see in the NFL, the NBA, the MLB, all these things where they're like, you have to pick one.
Yep. Riot has recently released. So obviously I'm friends with a lot of League of Legends coaches and people and stuff like that. And Riot has recently released, they finally drew the line. Right.
Oh, okay. I didn't know that. I was expecting this to happen. I just didn't know when.
It's happening. Like, they're applying it 2021. Where there's going to be, I don't know it very well yet because League is still, I'm still not super close to League. Well, I'm good at, I watch a lot of competitive League. I haven't watched the Collegiate League scene that much. But essentially what they're doing is that they're separating their University League of Legends stuff from their Amateur League of Legends stuff. There's still going to be amateur tournaments. And they're going to try and run an amateur circuit as much as possible towards them. Which I think will work out fair. I think it's really good. At least there's some structure now towards the amateur areas because I think, again, esports is one of the biggest issues with esports is that it's so top heavy and it's hard for people to develop talent. Like, once you have that, like, especially Dota, right? Dota talent development is especially in NA, is non-existent essentially.
Yeah, it's a grind, and on top of it, like, it's usually not rewarding. No. So a lot of people don't do it. It's
very difficult, and a lot of people just end up like retiring or not playing anymore, giving up the game before they even before they get to that opportunity or whatever. And I think that's why Collegiate is also kind of cool in that, again, as like, you have this the hope in the future is that people get these scholarships and they have something to fall back on when Dota 2 doesn't necessarily work out all the time. You still have a degree to go on, and whether or not how that degree will be paid, whether we'll have NCAA problems is obviously another thing to completely look at, and that's another issue for when we're big enough to think about it. But yeah, I think it's really cool that we might have scholarships in the near future for players.
I know some tournament organizers like CSL have a rule where it's like, if you've made X amount of money playing Dota in the last year, you're considered a pro, so you're not allowed to compete in their tournaments. Ooh. So that's been something that they've used as like a line-ish to try and draw. So some TOs have taken it upon themselves to do this, but I think if that's what Riot is doing, I like that decision where it's more of just like, hey, it does kind of mess with competition if you have players going between leagues. And I don't know like how it's going to reflect in Dota, because if you do that, we have such a small player base already that you just completely eliminate the possibility of having a collegiate scene, or you eliminate the possibility of having a tier 3 scene, since they are so heavily overlapped. I mean, when I look at these stacks that are competing in open qualifiers, most of these teams have at least 1, 2, or 3 collegiate players on them. Yeah, like a lot of them are full of college students. So
is what's happening like these collegiate players play in CSL, but at the same time are giving their things to like another team to play in the amateur leagues too?
Yeah, so that's what happens. Like, their CSL stack is pretty good, but it is so hard to get like an all-star 5 top players at one university. We don't see that that often. The most recent example was RIT 2 years ago, where they had just a stacked roster, all like top 1,000 players, which in a collegiate scene is good.
No, that's
but
huge.
If you want to compete in amateur or semi-pro Dota, you're looking at top 300 minimum. Like, that's going to be your roster. Yeah. So it is a huge jump in skill between those ranks, right? I mean, we're talking thousands of MMR. And so what happens is they'll take a lot of these teams will take like their top players from themselves, as well as like maybe some other schools or some pub players who, you know, either aren't in university yet or just never competed in CSL. And then they just form like kind of these all-star stacks essentially, which ends up working. You know, some of them have qualified, like for instance, Shu right now, the captain from, oh my gosh, Stony Brook, the captain of Stony Brook University. Yeah, he's competing in the BTS Summit 4 right now.
Oh wow,
or BTS Pro Series 4. He's on Team 5-Man Midas. Like he put together a superstar stack, and they're competing now out through open qualifiers. Like it happens. Like this isn't the first tournament he's qualified for using like kind of these all-star stacks.
All-star stacks are really like the way to pay. Like, I mean, if you want to put a good name out for yourself, and because essentially like a lot of collegiate and amateur tournaments, all these open qualifiers are essentially auditions for everyone.
Yep.
It's just a set of auditions and you need a team that backs you up like the best way possible to make everyone has to look as good as possible when they're doing it. Like for most people, the goal isn't necessarily to win the money. Winning the money is great, but to truly win the money, you have to be on a top team. And I think a lot of what collegiate might become, like collegiate will become, is essentially just like the auditioning spot for a lot of people. And I think we're starting to really see that happen, right? As an example, this year, a LCS team was able to take 2 players from Maryville, who were the winners of University League of Legends for like 2 years in a row. Yeah, and Maryville's this is the first time we've seen this transition of a collegiate person, or of collegiate people moving straight after collegiate into LCS, into like their pro scene, right? Which is, I think, a great development for them. Taking a chance on players that are straight out of collegiate and not other amateur scenes or their academy system. But also, a really interesting development that's happened this year is also we've seen the other thing go around. So a retired ex-pro player called Mike Young, who used to be a jungler, he played professional League of Legends for a few years. I don't really remember what the years were, but he played like 4 or 5 years ago. And now he retired and he's pursuing education. And so now he joined UC Irvine, a former professional player joined UC Irvine and is now playing for their their collegiate team. And I feel like this might be like something that'll happen more often as time goes by. What do you think?
Yeah. So that's an interesting scenario. You don't normally see it go that way, but with esports, because some of the players are so young when they you know, start playing, or when they, you know, make it onto teams, like there's countless examples. Like we can, from the Dota scene specifically, Sumail was 15 when he ended up on EG, and he won TI when he was 16 years old or something, or 17 years old. I mean, he's a super young kid, but like that's the type of scenario where you're like, okay, well, this is one of the world's best Dota 2 players. Can we just let him into collegiate and slaughter everyone? It's so weird. And I think that
it's a really weird scenario, right? Like, because when I first heard of it, I was like, damn, I don't really know what to make of this. I feel like this isn't something that we could prevent or anything.
Yeah,
but like, it's just gonna happen,
is
right?
Like, I feel like a dick saying no at the end of the day. If I was just like, sorry, Sumail, you're too good to compete in this league, I would feel bad, because I'm not taking away from him like necessarily the competition. I'm taking away the other experiences you gain from playing in the collegiate scene, or like I said, for me, the most valuable thing I got out of playing on my teams was like a lot of lifelong friendships. And that would suck if we're just like, sorry, Sumail, you can't do that. Or who's the guy that got into UCI?
Mike Young, I think.
So Mike Young, like if you just tell him, sorry, you can't compete in collegiate, like you're basically alienating him from the scene, which is unfair in my eyes. Like from that aspect, does it make the competition not as fun for, you know, every other player? Maybe. Maybe, but I think it sets like a weird precedent to just say, sorry, you can't. I think it's fair to say you can only compete in one at a time, potentially on the league side.
Yeah.
You know, where he can't go and like bounce back between a pro team
No, absolutely not. I don't think that's
and
the
a
thing.
collegiate team. But if he wants to say, hey, I'm going to go to university, I'm retiring from pro, I want to play on a collegiate stack with some cool people. I think, you know, I think that's fine.
I think again, I'm just looking at mostly the negatives of this. But if you look at like in the best possible scenario, what a university is getting is a seasoned pro who can tell these kids what exactly they're doing and what they're doing well or what they're doing wrong. You get an invaluable amount of experience from a guy who has spent time in the pro scene. And a lot of these kids that might want to go pro, you know, might be able to learn a lot from him. I think for sure they'll be able to learn a lot from him. And in the best case scenario, a lot of these people coming back to college might help the collegiate scene grow in ways that we would never have thought about before. Okay, so I think this is probably like going to be one of the last questions that I want to ask you. Oh, damn, I lost my train of thought. It was about, okay, I might cut this out because I need a bit. Fuck, I completely lost my train of thought. Hold on. What was I gonna ask you about? I already asked you about the positives. Oh, right. Okay. I think that I think a lot of people go into collegiate esports with this mindset of being just a player, right?
Yeah.
They go in, and I think a lot of people are introduced thinking that like the collegiate esports ecosystem are just players, when there's so much more around that goes around it that you need to understand. What do you like from your experiences? What are some of the other parts of collegiate esports other than being a player that you found really exciting and really interesting?
So for me, when I got into the university and joined Cal Poly Dota 2, I didn't really know what it was about. Like for me, I was like, yeah, just gonna be a player, no big deal. The following year ended up you know, on the board. I don't remember exactly what my title technically was, but it was something like basically helping organize events. We were kind of just like a smorgasbord of like Dota players trying to make stuff happen. My senior year, I, you know, went out and founded Cal Poly Esports, you know, as a way to bring all of the different clubs on campus together, give us a little bit more bargaining power with the university, because I think like as someone who had studied both computer science and business, like I understand the university is a business. Like that's what they speak in. And if you're like, hey, we're a bunch of gamers and we want help, and we're like, no, we're 700 gamers. This is like a huge portion of your computer science and computer engineering like students play in our games, like on our tournaments and stuff like that. Like, you know, they'll listen a little bit more.
And I think the experience of starting something from scratch is invaluable. Right. Like I would say that like for future, for like anything that you do in the future, whether or not you continue doing esports and stuff like that, starting something like that, I think means a lot, and it teaches you a lot.
Yeah, you really, if you're passionate about it and it's something you want to see at your school, and if it doesn't exist yet, you can make it happen. Like you can. It will require, you know, a good amount of work, but there's tons and tons and tons of resources outside of your university that you can reach out to. I mean, there's programs all over the country that have been established, are in the process of being established, and they are all looking to help other people out in the same scenario who have gone through it already and are trying to go through it now. Like this ecosystem is incredibly supportive. I will say that. That's the one thing I've learned from like talking with other people in collegiate esports and like just following certain people that I follow. Everyone wants to see this succeed. There's not a single person in the scene who's like, screw this. Like, I'm over it. I don't want it to do well. Like everyone wants collegiate esports to do well. Everyone wants to see it succeed. And so if you're at a university and you're, you know, wanting to, I guess, build something that's not already there, you can do it. It's going to take time and work, but you can. Just find some people that, you know, are kind of like-minded and make it happen. Like our esports club initially had 5 board members. Like that was it. We were 5 people. That was the whole club. You know, we were running everything, and then we slowly conned more and more people into on the board. No, I kid, but like it went from 5 people to like 15 the next year, and now it's doing a lot better. I mean, obviously with COVID, it's been a kind of a
No, it's been
rough year
It's
for a
been
lot
real
of
rough.
esports programs, but yeah, it's great to you'll see it grow. Like there are people who are going to your university with the same interest as you. You just may not know them. They may not know you exist. They may not know the club exists. So it's a lot of it is just outreach and trying to get these people involved, because ultimately, like, they'll want to be.
Yeah,
You just
outreach
gotta
is
give them
such a
something to be
it's such a
involved in.
big thing. Yeah, outreach is such a big thing. I
Yeah,
think
it
that
really
like I think especially being in an esports club, one of the main things is that like I think the stereotype with a lot of people in esports is that, oh, people are kind of nerdy and the players are hard to, like, they don't reach out very well, and they don't do social media very well, which is on some level true, especially for Dota 2. I think that a lot of these players have problems like reaching out, whether it be doing social media or getting their own name out there. And I think working within this esports ecosystem, within the collegiate ecosystem, you'll learn that like a lot of times you have to self-promote, or you have to do a lot of these things yourself, and it really gives you a holistic understanding of what it means, A, to run a collegiate organization or any organization in general, and B, what it means to like really do stuff in esports, right? I think that's pretty much it that I wanted to ask you about. One thing that I would want to end this podcast on is that for the people who are interested in university esports, I think one of the best things that you can do is follow a lot of these esports organizations on Twitter, whether it be Cloud9, Liquid, EG. I think EG specifically has a lot of EG now is really supportive of Collegiate. They have a lot of seminars that they do that I find extremely helpful, whether it be like anything that you want to do, whether you want to coach, be a player, be a person who's in the industry, managing talent, blah blah blah. Like, I think they have a lot of resources that are available for free right there if anybody wants to look at that and wants to get into collegiate gaming. But other than that, thank you so much, Ricky, for coming on and talking to me about this. This was a really great conversation. I hope your casting goes really well with Neff. I hope you guys have a good time, and thank you very much.
I appreciate you having me on, man. It was it's cool. I always enjoy talking collegiate esports. It's something near, like we said, near and dear to my heart, and
sure.
I just want to see it do well. So feel free to reach out whenever if you want to have another conversation sometime. I'm
definitely
down.
Man, definitely. I think collegiate esports stuff is gonna happen, and I definitely do want to cover that. Anyway, thank you very much, man. I appreciate it.
Absolutely. You have a wonderful day, man.